You've probably seen this picture before. I used to see her all the time attached to some clickbait article. I thought it was Photoshop, but I found out not only is this image very real, the story behind how this young lady ended up in this predicament, how her eyes became this shocking shade of black, is one of tragedy, one in which tens of thousands of people lost their lives. This is the story of how a young girl's final moments will forever remain a symbol of Colombia's worst national disaster and the second deadliest disaster of the 20th century. Before we get into it, hello, welcome to Creepycassettiyt, your place for horror, in reality and beyond. My name is Dee, and if you like dark history, weird mysteries, true crime, and strange tales, you might want to subscribe because we do that here. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our chats. And if you learn anything from today's video, please like and share because these actions really help. Now back to the topic. I just want to note, I pull all of my sources from articles found on the web. Some of those articles are in Spanish and require translation. It's possible things got lost in that translation. So if I missed something or explained something incorrectly, please let us all know in the comments, kindly, please. I'm learning, you're learning, that's what we do here. So say your piece, but with kindness, preferably. Armero Columbia in 1985 was the third largest town in the Tolima department, overshadowed by the towns of Ibagué and Espinal, a farm town blessed with fertile soil from the shadow of a massive stratovolcano called the Nevado del Ruiz, just 48 kilometers or 30 miles away. Armero in 1985 provided 1/5 of the country's rice production, along with a large share in cotton, sorghum, and coffee production. The volcano is named for the snow and ice that covers it. It sits at a height of around 17,500 feet above sea level. The volcano has a history of small eruptions. Some of those eruptions cause what are called lahars. Lahars are dangerous mudflows and debris resulting from a mixture of melted glacier and pyroclastic flows. The last time that the Nevado del Ruiz erupted, prior to the disaster we're discussing today, was 1845. The volcano was due for another eruption, and volcanologists made their concerns known 2 months prior to the eruption that caused tens of thousands of people their lives. Flyers were handed out in advance, media ran short segments to keep people informed on the volcano's activity. Hazard maps were printed just a month before the disaster and poorly distributed. We'd later find out from the few survivors of this tragedy that they had no idea about the maps. Armero was in an area that would be greatly impacted by one of these lahars. The Colombian Congress accused scientists and civil defense agencies of scaremongering with all the press they were putting out to keep people informed. Yet many went without any warning of just the kind of devastation that could befall their town in the event of an eruption. On November 13th, 1985, pillars of black ash shot up from the volcano at around 3 p.m. The local civil defense director was notified. He contacted Jimena, which is now known as the Colombian Geological Survey. Jimena declared the area should be evacuated. The civil defense directors in Tolima and Bogota were contacted. An emergency committee meeting was held at 5 p.m. to plan evacuation procedures. Meanwhile, the ash stopped falling and people were advised to stay in their homes and to stay calm. The meeting went on until 7 p.m. Members of the Regional Red Cross were contacted to start evacuations in Armero, Mariquita, and Honda. The Ibagué Red Cross reached out to the officials in Armero to initiate evacuation. The evacuation was not carried out because a heavy thunderstorm was sweeping the area at the same time, and it may have overpowered the sound of the volcano's activity. So the people of Armero had no idea what was going on, and at 9:45 p.m. the volcano erupted. Civil defense officials from Ibagué and Murillo tried to reach out to officials in Armero, and they were unable to reach anyone because of electrical failures caused by the thunderstorm. The residents of Armero were scrambling, trying to figure out what was going on, gauging how concerned authorities were with what was going on, and they were told that this was nothing to worry about. Local radio stations advised them to stay calm and just ignore what must have seemed like some kind of apocalyptic scenario. The eruption melted 5 to 10% of the Arena crater ice cap covering the volcano. From that point, the lives of anyone who remained within tens of kilometers around the Nevado del Ruiz were in grave peril. The lahars came in 3 separate waves: massive streams of volcanic debris, water, mud, anything this flow could get a hold of rushed down into the valley below the volcano. In some places, this mud flow reached heights of 30 meters or 98 feet. It rushed at surrounding towns, including Armero, at a speed of 50 kilometers or 30 miles per hour. The mud flow's movements ripped away trees, entire layers of topsoil, farming equipment, cars, people, animals, and strengthened with the inclusion of water ripped from nearby rivers. It covered and completely destroyed the vast majority of Armero's infrastructure, houses, roadways, bridges, etc. 5 fuel pumps were dislodged and any remaining power was completely taken down. The Lahar flowed in mile-wide streaks in some areas. As a result, some people were swept away, some people attempted to kind of swim through the debris, unable to gain their footing or pull themselves out of the thick sludge. Many were overwhelmed by the current, overtaken, and drowned. Many residents were trapped in their homes as the walls came crashing down around them. All of Armero was devastated. The mud flow carved through the town in some places while it tapered off, hindered by heavy equipment in others. The water that mixed in with the mud and debris reached temperatures of 70 degrees Celsius or 158 degrees Fahrenheit in some places, slightly cooled by the icy waters from the broken iceberg. It wasn't just the temperature people had to deal with, there was also chemical reactions from a mixture of sulfuric acid and water, both of which caused significant second-degree burns for survivors on top of the numerous other injuries. Yet, they were the lucky ones because this devastating mud flow killed 70% of Armero's population, taking the town's population of 28,700 down to an estimated 5,000 people. Now I've seen estimated death tolls of 21,000 to 25,000. Those estimates actually factor in not only the impact to Armero, but the impacts to the nearby town of Jimena, where around 1,800 people died, along with deaths and injuries, 400 homes, bridges, market stalls, etc. It was all taken down. And needless to say, many of the survivors from both towns were displaced following the disaster. Of the many pictures of fatalities that were captured from this disaster, one remains a heart-wrenching reminder of those lost. A picture of a young girl with short black curls framing her face, her arms gripping a wooden pole, her hands white as if the melanin in them was drained, and her eyes pitch black. The picture was taken by French photographer Frank Fournier, and it's called The Agony of Omayra Sánchez. Omayra Sanchez Garzon was 13 the day the sleeping lion, the name residents of Armero called the Nevado de Ruiz, erupted and took away the majority of her immediate family. Omayra's family consisted of her father, Alvaro Enrique Sanchez, who worked as a rice harvester, her mother, Maria Leda, her 11-year-old brother, Alvarito, her maternal aunt, Maria Adela Garzon, and her auntie's 1.5-year-old baby. When the disaster occurred, her mother was in Bogota earning a diploma. While she wasn't a part of the disaster, she would lose almost her entire family in one fell swoop. The Sanchez family were wide awake that night. Everyone was concerned between the ashfall and the loud sounds coming from outside. Mr. Sanchez attempted to calm his children, and at around 11:30 p.m. he locked the doors. The noises outside turned deafening with the rush of the first Lahar and their neighbors' screams as they were rushed away with the mud and debris. Within minutes, the Sanchez household crumbled. Alvaro, Omayra's aunt, and her baby cousin drowned almost immediately. Unnervingly enough, Omayra's aunt's outstretched arms and head were helping to support Omayra beneath the concrete slabs, trapping her lower half. Above her head, the zinc ceiling tiles she'd spent her whole life looking at, which probably even provided her with some comfort in her life, landed right above her head, creating a barrier between herself and rescuers. She yelled and tapped on the tiles with a stick, eventually catching the attention of rescuers from the Colombian Air Force. They grabbed bags of rice to create a bridge to get over to her. They pulled away the top layer of construction materials to reveal where the voice was coming from, uncovering her face and freeing her torso. The rescuers attempted to pull Omayra out of the field of debris, but her legs were trapped and they couldn't pull her out without causing further injury. Now as the hours passed by and rescue efforts took place, the mud rose closer and closer to her face, and they had to use a tire to keep her head above water as the liquid overlapped her. Divers swam beneath the field of mud, debris, water, and chemicals to find out what was keeping Omayra stuck, and they discovered her legs bent, out of shape, crushed by by the weight of concrete slabs. They tried to push the slabs away to give her some kind of room that would allow them to pull her up, but it was too heavy, and when they would attempt to move it, the water would cover her face again. A group of rescuers spent hours brainstorming ways to free the young girl, while others worked on pulling other survivors to safety and removing the dead where they could. Omayra, even though she had been trapped for hours at this point, she remained positive, even showing empathy for other survivors, saying, "There are many more people trapped. I can wait." Rescuers stayed by her side, giving her sweets and keeping her company. Omayra showed immense bravery and kindness. She smiled, she laughed a little, she even sang to one of the interviewers. Frank Fournier took a plane from New York to Colombia's capital, Bogota, to capture the rescue efforts going on in Armero. He arrived in Bogota 2 days after the eruption. Travel to Armero took about 7 hours, 5 hours by car, and then the 2 hours by foot. When he arrived, the city was complete chaos. Rescue efforts were poorly managed and further hindered by a lack of supplies and lack of hands. Rescue attempts that under ideal conditions would have taken minutes were slowed by the muddy sludge, higher than the tops of some houses in areas. It was nearly impossible for rescuers to find their footing. They had assistance from a few different entities, including members of the Colombian military. However, they lacked many necessary tools for first aid, and they didn't even have a pump to pump away the water. An appeal was made to the government to have water pump brought in, and the closest town to have a pump was Medellin, which in normal conditions would be a close to 8-hour drive, let alone having their trek hindered by the masses and masses of mud and debris. Furthermore, supplies and hands were limited as the country was still on high alert following the siege of the Palace of Justice in Bogota by a group of M19 rebels just a few days before the eruption, a siege that resulted in the deaths of 12 Supreme Court magistrates along with 2 security guards and 43 civilians, with M19 suffering their own losses, ending in 33 of their own casualties. Needless to say, much of the military was preoccupied with securing that area, so less hands were available in Armero and other towns that needed assistance. Then supplies to aid in the disaster are also limited by the 1985 Mexico earthquake, which occurred 2 months before the eruption. The lack of supplies, lack of hands, and lack of significant warning did not fare well for the people of Armero and surrounding towns. People were moaning and screaming for help before they eventually just went silent, having succumbed to their injuries. Many were trapped by debris, rescuers working around the clock to pull as many people to safety as they could, hindered by nearly 30 meters or 100 feet of sludge. Helicopters to aid in rescue efforts were combing the area overhead, directing rescuers to victims they could see from the sky. A farmer flagged down Fournier, telling him about a young girl who needed help. He led Fournier to Omayra. People were around her, talking with her, keeping her company. They were just trying to come up with some kind of plan to get this girl out of here. And at that point, Omayra had been trapped between the pieces of concrete for 3 days. She was confused, in pain, hallucinating. When the sense of dread surrounded her, she cried and she prayed. She even gave reporters a message to her mother. She said, "Mom, if you listen to me, I think so. Pray that I can walk and that these people can help me." But they couldn't help her. They didn't have a pump to get the water out of the way so it would stop nearly drowning her with every movement. They couldn't pull her from the debris without causing serious damage to her legs. They thought about removing her legs, but they didn't have surgical tools, sterilization equipment, a way to seal her wounds or protect her from infection following the surgery, especially in a place that was covered in all manner of potentially dangerous material. A civil defense expert determined that they were not equipped to succeed in releasing Omayra from the concrete slabs, and instead they would just stand beside her and provide her with comfort until she eventually passed on. So that's what they did, and things just continued. Rescuers continued their efforts on others, while the press, lifeguards, and a few kind souls stood by her for the short remainder of her life. They gave her sweets, talked to her, tried to give her some semblance of comfort. Fournier mentioned feeling helpless in the face of this young girl. He felt that while he could not physically help her out of her predicament, maybe he could help tell her story, which would in turn help to tell the story of the tens of thousands of other people who could no longer speak for themselves. Her eyes glazed over a bitter shade of black, filling with blood from burst vessels, and days she spent beneath the mudflow, injured, trapped between pieces of immovable concrete she would eventually succumb to. Fournier hoped it would mobilize others to help those who remained. And in her final hours, Omayra drifting in and out of consciousness, her hallucinations causing her to ask Fournier to take her to school so she wouldn't miss a math test. And in that moment, it probably didn't even click that her school had also been destroyed. And within 3 hours of Fournier meeting Omayra, taking her pictures and learning her story, she was dead. And the cause of death was either gangrene or hypothermia or both. When she transitioned, she let go of the wooden beam that had been helping her stay afloat for days and leaned her head back, closing her eyes for the final time. Bystanders pulled away some blankets to cover her and her aunt, and their hearts broken for the girl who remained courageous down to her final minutes. Fournier handed Omayra's pictures off to 2 photographers who were headed to the airport with the mission of getting those images back to his agent in Paris. A few days later, Omayra's final moments were published in Paris Match, disturbing all of those who came across her likeness, the way she connected with the viewer through the camera, her pitch black eyes. It was unsettling to say the least, and this was something most people had never seen, and they were outraged. So many questions about Omayra, how she got into this predicament, why it was that this image was captured instead of pulling her from this ordeal, and people really questioned Fournier's motives, and many accused him of being a vulture. Fournier had to tell them there was nothing he could do, there was nothing anyone could do for her. All he could do was show the world her courage and draw their attention to the people who still needed their help. Her image was plastered across news channel after news channel where people debated the photojournalist's aim, the main question always being why couldn't anyone get her out of there. The world blamed much of the carnage on the Colombian government. What the government told everyone was that they'd use their best equipment and supplies, but their argument was disproved by volunteer workers who recapped the situation, stating that there were large crowds, disorganization, a lack of the most basic supplies like shovels and stretchers and cutting tools. But Fournier may have been right, because the picture did draw in some much needed aid and help bring about changes to warning and evacuation procedures in Colombia. The US government donated $1 million. US Ambassador Charles A. Gillespie Jr. donated $25,000 to the Colombian Disaster Assistance Institution. A member of the United States Geological Survey, a US aid disaster relief expert, 12 helicopters with support and medical personnel from Panama were dispatched to Colombia. The US was just one of 25 other nations that contributed to disaster relief efforts. Other countries gave clean water, money, blankets, tents, repair kits, survival basics, and numerous other much needed supplies to help those that remained heal from this tragedy. Following the disaster, the US Geological Survey and US Agency for International Development Office launched the International Volcano Disaster Assistance Program, or VDAP. This program is responsible for monitoring 1,550 volcanoes around the world, and since its inception in 1986, they have detected 70 major crises at more than 50 volcanoes and strengthened response capacity in 13 countries, according to USAID.gov. The United Nations Guidance Manual, called the Volcanic Emergency Management, was referenced by Colombia in creating their own volcano disaster evacuation plan. The Observatorio Volcanológico de Colombia in Manizales was created, and this group is responsible for monitoring signs of an impending eruption. If they notice concerning behavior coming from the volcano, they are responsible for notifying Colombia's president. A representative for the president, along with several agencies and departments, Comité Operativo de Emergencia, or the COE, are then responsible for assigning volcano-related tasks to the correct departments to have plans carried out. Then they would reach out to the Civil Defense Group for the area. The Civil Defense of Colombia is responsible for training people for disaster response, disaster prevention, reduction of impacts. Basically, they're responsible for carrying out the footwork required to keep people safe in the event of a disaster, and they remain involved in the process from start to finish. The Civil Defense informs the governor of a jurisdiction, who then informs the police departments, and the media would inform siren keepers, which would inform the public to evacuate the area. Colombia also established volcano monitoring observatories responsible for keeping watch of 23 active volcanoes in the country. When the Nevado del Ruiz erupted again 4 years later, one of the observatories was able to detect the increased seismic activity, and they were able to evacuate neighboring towns quickly. No loss of life was recorded following this incident. A campaign for public education was instated. Children are given lectures about volcano hazards, and Red Cross also circulates thousands of flyers with information along with reminders that if the neighborhood sirens were to go off, people needed to take cover and evacuate the area. Hazard maps were created to prepare at-risk townships with evacuation plans to reach higher ground in the event of interruption. Evacuation route markers were also painted on the side of buildings with instructions to get to safety. I'm not going to go into everything that changed following the disaster, but I hope this brief overview gives you an idea of how things changed following Nevado del Ruiz eruption in 1985, and I hope that you'll read up more on everything we talked about today, and I encourage you to do your own research. Glimmer of hope for Omayra's family. Her little brother, Alvarito, survived. He didn't make it out completely unscathed. He did lose a finger in the process, but he escaped with his life, and he received medical care, and he was taken to his mother, and I hope they are doing well to this day. Frank Fournier received the World Press Photo of the Year in 1986 for the agony of Omayra Sanchez, which feels a little strange. I mean, these were the final moments of a 13-year-old girl, but it was also a photo that made a huge impact on the world, so I guess I kind of understand. And if this is the first time you're hearing about the Armero tragedy, I hope you learned something today, and I hope you'll keep the survivors in your thoughts. And I know that this is a moment in time that will never be forgotten. Omayra remains in Armero, and a tomb that is visited by thousands of people a year. They bring her flowers and sweet and warm messages, and her tomb serves as an ongoing reminder of the astronomical casualties of this tragedy. And she's also a symbol of courage as she held her smile even in the face of death. And my heart goes out to her family and the loved ones of those who were lost. And I send peace and love to all of those who survive. I will see you all very soon for another video. Please take care of yourself. Bye-bye.